The story begins with rising tensions in the Middle East, where Qatar has often been viewed as a key backer of Hamas through financial channels, diplomatic shelter, and media influence. Israel, facing continued threats from Hamas, has long argued that without Qatar's political and financial cover, Hamas would struggle to operate as freely as it does. In this hypothetical scenario, the world asks a provocative question: what would happen if Israel decided to strike directly at Qatar, targeting Hamas networks and assets in Doha itself? This is not just a military puzzle but a geopolitical earthquake, because such a strike would stretch far beyond the battlefield and would shake alliances, economies, and global diplomacy. The story, therefore, is not only about weapons and targets but about the clash between security imperatives and international consequences. Hello everyone, welcome back to the World Conflict Monitor channel. Please subscribe to my channel. In today's deep dive we explore the controversial and complex question of how Israel might launch strikes against Hamas targets in Qatar, particularly in Doha. This discussion is not only about military capabilities but also about politics, strategies, risks, and the far-reaching consequences of such an operation. We will break this down in terms of exterior dynamics, interior vulnerabilities, performance of the militaries involved, safety considerations, the unique selling points of Israel's approach, the price both sides would pay, and finally a conclusion on what this all means for the region and the world. On the exterior side, Israel views Qatar as an indirect but highly influential player in the conflict with Hamas. Qatar provides humanitarian funding to Gaza, officially under United Nations frameworks, but critics argue that much of this support ends up strengthening Hamas control. Doha has hosted Hamas leaders in luxury, giving them safe haven far from the battlefield. For Israel, the exterior challenge is that Hamas operations are not confined to Gaza's tunnels or Palestinian cities but extend into global capitals through networks of money, politics, and information. To strike Hamas in Doha, Israel would need to consider the layers of geography, distance, air defense, and diplomatic cover. Qatar is not Gaza, and Doha is not a war zone. It is a modern capital, heavily protected by international law, American bases, and diplomatic ties. Yet Israel has a long history of long-range operations, from the Entebbe raid in Uganda to the bombing of Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor. These precedents suggest that in theory, the Israeli military could devise ways to project power into Qatar. When we turn to the interior, things look very different. Qatar itself is small geographically, roughly the size of Connecticut, but highly dense in terms of wealth, energy infrastructure, and foreign presence. The U.S. Air Base at Al Udeid is one of the largest American installations in the region, housing thousands of troops, strategic aircraft, and advanced defense systems. Any Israeli attempt to operate within Qatari airspace would risk collision, confusion, or even confrontation with the U.S. military itself. The interior dynamics also include Qatar's own security apparatus, which, while not massive, is bolstered by advanced purchases of Western technology, including Eurofighter Typhoons, Rafale jets, and Patriot missile defense systems. Hamas leaders in Doha, if they are indeed sheltered there, do not live in underground bunkers but in high-security villas or hotels under Qatari watch. This makes them simultaneously easier and harder targets, easier because they are in open, visible, civilian spaces, but harder because striking them would cause international outrage over civilian casualties and violations of sovereignty. Looking at performance, Israel's military capacity is unrivaled in the Middle East in terms of technology, training, and combat experience. Its Air Force operates F-35I stealth fighters, capable of flying long distances undetected, with precision-guided munitions that can strike specific targets with surgical accuracy. Israel's intelligence services, particularly Mossad and Amman, have a track record of operating in hostile territories, gathering information, and even carrying out assassinations abroad. From Dubai to Tehran, there are multiple examples of Israel hitting adversaries beyond its borders. The challenge here is not capability but political cost. Israel's performance in such a mission would depend on precise intelligence about Hamas' presence in Doha, secure aerial corridors to bypass hostile radar, and the ability to strike without igniting a regional war. Safety features in this context are less about the aircraft and more about risk mitigation. Israel has learned through decades of warfare that striking too broadly leads to unintended civilian casualties, which then translate into international condemnation and political isolation. Therefore, the safety features of any such operation would involve careful planning to avoid harming civilians, ensuring that diplomatic fallout is contained, and possibly even coordinating indirectly with allies to signal restraint. The risk of escalation is enormous because Qatar hosts not just US troops but also Turkish influence, and its wealth gives it the power to retaliate economically through gas exports. Safety, therefore, is about avoiding a broader war that Israel cannot control. The unique selling points of Israel's military approach lie in its combination of intelligence, innovation, and determination. Unlike many countries that rely solely on brute force, Israel's unique capability is its ability to integrate human intelligence networks with cutting-edge military technology. Operations abroad often rely on years of surveillance, undercover agents, cyber infiltration, and then a pinpoint strike that sends a political message. Striking in Doha would not only neutralize Hamas leaders but also send a chilling signal to any group or state offering sanctuary to Israel's enemies. It would demonstrate that distance, wealth, and international borders are no shield against Israel's reach. This deterrence factor is a unique selling point that Israel has cultivated since its founding, ensuring that enemies think twice before plotting attacks from abroad. The price, however, would be staggering. Militarily, Israel would invest significant resources in such an operation, but the larger cost would be diplomatic and economic. Qatar is a leading supplier of liquefied natural gas, with deep ties to Europe, Asia, and the United States. Any strike on its territory would spark outrage from allies who rely on Qatari energy. It could fracture Israel's quiet relationships with Gulf states that have been warming under the Abraham Accords. The Arab street would explode with anger, and Israel would face not just protests but possibly boycotts, sanctions, or retaliatory attacks from Iran-backed groups. The price would also include the risk of escalation with the US, which would see Israeli operations near Al Udeid as reckless endangerment of American personnel. In conclusion, the idea of Israel striking Hamas in Doha is both fascinating and terrifying. It showcases the lengths Israel might go to in order to defend itself but also highlights the immense risks of extending the battlefield into the heart of one of the richest and most influential Gulf states. Such a move would redefine the conflict, forcing every regional and global power to take sides. While Israel's capabilities make it technically possible, the consequences might outweigh the benefits, leaving the world to wonder, is security worth the cost of destabilizing the entire Middle East? This story is therefore less about whether Israel can strike and more about whether it should, and what the world would look like the morning after.